Hi, I'm Andrew Cunningham. My team consists of me, Alex Burns, and Professor Nargis Mahir. Our poster is called Looking to the Past to Visualize the Present, Revisiting W.E.B. Du Bois' Abolitionist Visualizations. In 1900, W.E.B. Du Bois presented 63 visualizations at the Paris Exposition, put together by his team of all black data scientists. The end product was an unfolding story of black resilience following the abolition of slavery in the United States. It emphasized trends of opportunities being seized amidst the dismantlement of oppressive systems, and it inspired hope for the future of race in America. Over 100 years later, we chose 7 of Du Bois' original visualizations to recreate in order to view today's America through the lens of Du Bois' portraits. We chose the visualizations based on a couple of factors. For one, we wanted to fit them into 5 categories, which were wealth, geography, job opportunity, educational opportunity, and incarceration. And then within those categories, we wanted to choose data visualizations that had data readily available, which was easily translatable from the past to the present. We searched for the appropriate data in the US Census, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Justice statistics, and also the National Alliance to End Homelessness, as well as the publication Education Week. We gathered our data points to convert the original charts from 1900 into more modern renditions. Our first iteration was in not so pretty hand-drawn charts with handwritten labels, so we could spend more time with the data in a more physical way. And then we prettied up the charts by scanning them and digitally stylizing them. This was the final product. The bottom row is the original series of Du Bois charts, and the top row is our revisiting. The first one is a chart on the percentage of black people in America who were free from slavery, leading up to the legal abolition of slavery. The chart spans from 1790 to 1870. It's an area chart where the red area represents black people who are free, and we can see that the 2% mark here is marked as a dashed line for reference. Now, this is a pretty low rate overall leading up to the abolition of slavery, but then we see once slavery is officially abolished, the area leaps up to 100%. The chart here is torn to emphasize the significance of that, while simultaneously allowing us to zoom in on the lower rate of freedom we see prior to the leap. The moment where our data leaps literally off the chart is an exciting historical moment where an oppressive system has been, for the most part, dismantled. In our modern equivalent, we look at incarceration data as our current topic of abolition movements, as well as the modern equivalent to slavery. Our chart spans from 1980 to 2018. We can use our dashed line here for reference to show us the 99% freedom mark. In this case, our red area represents freedom, while our black area represents incarceration. Worth noting is that 1980 marked the start of Ronald Reagan's presidency, which introduced an era of bipartisan tough-on-crime rhetoric that disproportionately affected black incarceration rates. So we see a sharp increase in black incarceration from 1980 to 2000, and then finally we see a warped V shape start to take form, where we now have a slightly lower but opposite rate of incarceration. So we're seeing a little bit of decarceration leading into 2018. This leaves us with a rate of black incarceration which is still double what it was in 1980, after years of steady reform. We tore the right side of the graph rather than the left because part of this narrative is that there's still so much work to be done, and we'll never see the optimism that Du Bois' chart was able to display if we don't dismantle the systems which have led to such a high rate of black incarceration. On this next chart, we're looking at a bar graph showing the types of employment that black Americans had following the abolition of slavery. The top categories are agricultural laborers and farmers and planters. Du Bois also adds up all of the lower bars into one bigger bar to show us that while there's so many opportunities that have come about, these new opportunities, even when stacked up, don't reach third place in overall black employment. This is still ultimately optimistic because it seems to forecast that these opportunities will become more and more prevalent as time goes on. In our revisiting, we see this start to take shape. The top 2 job categories are now office and administrative support and transportation material moving, which are very different from the farming and agricultural labor from 1890. And part of this is just due to the change in the times. Agriculture was a much bigger industry then than it is now, but this still seems optimistic in that we're seeing the gap between the top employers and the bottom employers start to decline. However, what's not shown in this chart is that there's still a disparity present in this. This becomes much more visible in the next chart, which compares black employment in the top wedge to white employment in the bottom wedge. This is color-coded by industry, so the biggest chunk is agricultural, fisheries, and mining, and the next is service. We don't see a big disparity in the first chunk, but where we do see disparity is between black and white Americans working in service. We can see that 28% of black Americans are employed in this field versus the 5.5% of white Americans. And what's alarming about this is that this trend persists into our modern counterpart. We can view our modern pie chart as a direct product of, but not a one-to-one mapping to Du Bois charts. We changed the colors to reflect the change in industry categories, though we did map what was previously service to what is now domestic and personal service, and that's the yellow chunk. So again, we have the top wedge representing black employment, while the bottom wedge represents white employment. The purple chunk represents management jobs. There are 32% of black folks in management, while there are 41% of white folks. And this is likely a product of cyclic poverty, inherited generational opportunity, and access to traditional educational success, etc., which are all remnants of our oppressive history. We can also see a continued disparity in the one category that remains consistent between these charts, which is domestic and personal service. Here we see that 24% of black folks are employed in domestic and personal service, while 16% of white folks are. A disparity in job opportunities directly perpetuates these cycles of systemic oppression. We can see these cycles of systemic oppression even deeper in this next chart. Here we have Du Bois' original chart, which shows the rate of pauperism in black Americans, which is 86 to every 100,000 at the time Du Bois made the chart. The original chart is optimistic in that this dot is very small compared to the surrounding semicircle, which reflects the total black population. The bar beneath this semicircle is showing us a gender breakdown of pauperism. And now in our modern chart, we couldn't get intersectional data for race and gender. However, we could get the rate of black homelessness, which was our modern translation of pauperism. We now see this much larger red dot representing 552 black Americans living homeless to every 100,000. This is a confrontational red dot. It's a persisting tragedy through generations of oppression, and it's a symbol of a gap in inherited wealth. In this chart, we can see the way in which history has bled directly through to our modern day. You can also see this effect in geographic trends. This is a chart that Du Bois made on the distribution of black population across southern states compared to all of the northern states combined. So we can see here that the three states with the highest black populations are Georgia, Mississippi, and South Carolina. And each one of these states individually has a higher black population than all of the northern states combined. This concentration of black population in the southern states is reflective of the fact that the southern states have held on to slavery the longest. And so in the modern day counterpart, we see a much larger distribution. We kept Du Bois ordering rather than resorting by new populations. We can see that Georgia, Mississippi, and South Carolina are no longer larger than all non-southern states combined. And this is an optimistic reminder that things have changed over the years. The remnants that we can see of the past is when we look at the map of the overall trends in state-by-state black populations. This is the black population of the United States from Du Bois' visualization. Darker colors represent higher black populations, and black shaded states have the highest black populations. Here we can see our counterpart. We can see in both graphs that Georgia is shaded black. When we look up to the northwestern parts of the United States, we'll see that some of the increases in black population of these states may have accounted for a lot of the overall shifts in black population from the south. Yet still, when we zoom in on Georgia, we see a residual pattern of higher black populations, even when normalized by overall population. So the idea that geography can proxy in for race on some level, as it has both for legislation and in algorithms, is very easy to grasp looking at this visualization. A concrete example of this is in gerrymandering, where predominantly black areas are districted in such a way that the impact of the black vote is minimized in electoral politics. This sort of effect also seeps into our algorithms through our data. The default behavior of an algorithm which makes decisions based on historical data is to be racist and to make racist connections, because as we can see in this chart, our data has so much oppressive history baked right into it. Our last chart looks at education. Du Bois' original chart looks at the growth in the number of black educators between 1889 and 1897. We can see this consistent increase from 2,500 black educators to 3,300. And this bubbling up of black educators was really exciting to see. When we revisit this with our modern chart, we don't see quite as much of a bubbling up. From 1991 to 2016, we see our statistic go from 212,000 black educators to 256,000 black educators. That's a lower percentage-wise growth in black educators, which could be viewed as a natural plateau, but when we compare this rate of growth to the increase in overall educators in the United States, we see that the overall rate of growth is actually an exponential curve, and that this increase in black teachers does not keep up with the curve. When we combine this lack of educational representation with the geographic disparities and wealth disparities, we have a recipe that breeds disparity in educational opportunities for Black Americans. And at the very core of that, this is going to be limiting to occupational success. But even indirectly in our algorithms, we have a lot of systems that use education to gauge success. For instance, we have an algorithm that helps determine bail sentencing in US court systems, which uses education to help determine risk scores. This could very easily lead to a situation where race is proxied in to abstract away oppressive behaviors of our algorithms. So what can we do? How can we be anti-racist in our use of data? We need an abolitionist movement in data. Like Yashima Bate Milner talks about in her talk Abolish Big Data, we should be taking an abolitionist approach which reimagines the structures underlying our data usage. Rather than capitalizing on data in a way that exploits existing patterns, we should be using data to tell stories in ways that can lead us to solutions. We should apply tenets of critical race theory to HCI, which means we have to recognize and study racism within our own systems and learn how to combat it. We can't just wait for red flags to tell us that an algorithm is being racist. We have to dig deeper and understand how our own work is connected to harmful power systems. We need to be other conscious, which means that we need to make sure that we're considering any and all perspectives, not just those represented by ourselves. We need to review our work alongside the work of people of other views and backgrounds. Specifically, we need to listen to people from underrepresented and marginalized backgrounds to make sure that our work is not causing harm to other identities. We need to also actively and explicitly seek out a diverse team and be mindful of who we are and are not able to represent. Part of creating more strongly objective work, which can bring as many people to the table as possible, is to seek out as many ways as we can to bring those perspectives forward. This means looking for work to cite from people who have different identities from us, amplifying that work, trying to understand it, and work their perspectives into our own work. Lastly, we need to realize every implication of the history of the data that we work with, and what sorts of narratives might already be at play in the data that we use, to make sure that the narratives of our work are narratives that align with us and with our values.